The origins of Black people in Oklahoma really revolves around slavery. For Oklahoma, the draw was the available land. We believe about 3,000 enslaved Blacks came to Oklahoma with indigenous people as their slaves beginning in the 1830s. Slavery in Indian Territory or in Oklahoma was similar to slavery in other parts of the country in the sense that Black Americans, Black people were the property of a slaveholder or a slave owner. Once slavery was formally abolished in 1865, Black people in Oklahoma received something, or at least a promise of something that enslaved people in other parts of the country, particularly the South, did not receive, and that was a promise of land ownership. The federal government forced the Native nations to not only provide land allotments, but they also required them to extend political rights, civil liberties to them. Black people, after gaining their freedom, could perhaps own land and gain citizenship within tribal nations. And so in Oklahoma, post-slavery, Black people had a different reality. They had a basis for economic independence, for political and economic rights based on the treaties that the federal government forced tribal nations to sign. That created a new reality for Black Oklahomans. And so because of those land allotments, it created the basis for what would become the 50 all-Black towns. Most of those all-Black towns were in eastern Oklahoma. That was sort of the main sort of areas in which tribal nations held land. The presence of all-Black towns became kind of a beacon for Black people in the Deep South because of the prospect of land ownership. And the reason why Black people are attracted to Oklahoma is not just the prospect of land, but it's also the presence of Black boosters, an individual or entities that are trying to encourage migration to a place. Essentially what boosters try to do is to paint a picture of what your life like is where you are and how it could be better. We have to just really understand land is the way in which the cycle of poverty was broken in America, whether you were Black or white. And so land was so important. The idea of Oklahoma as a place where Black people could, particularly who were fleeing the South, could reestablish themselves and go from, penniless sharecroppers to landowners. In 1906, O.W. Gurley, who's considered to be one of the founders of Black Wall Street, purchased a swath of land that would become the basis upon the Greenwood neighborhood, the Greenwood district. What we know in terms of the 1910 census, there were roughly about 1,000 Black people in Tulsa. By 1921, there are over 11,000 Black people. So they would have properties that were connected to each other, and connecting multiple properties together, they could begin to build an all-Black town. They could begin to build, a community. Tulsa is a boom town built on oil and oil wealth. And the prospect of oil wealth attracted Black people as well as whites. And so Tulsa had, as a whole, maybe a couple thousand people, right, in 1905. By 1921, there's roughly 100,000 people, right, in Tulsa proper. The groups that had been in Tulsa get dwarfed by the incoming migration of Black Americans from the South, as well as white Southerners who are coming to Tulsa in search of land, in search of wealth, to build that better life that we talked about.